We worry so much about how to raise our children. We read books, we listen to experts, we argue about sleep training and screen time and the right way to introduce solid foods. It feels complicated, overwhelming. But what if the blueprint for raising a healthy, happy human is already inside us? What if our instincts, buried under layers of modern advice, are pointing us toward a way of being with our children that is ancient and deeply human? To understand this, we need to go back, way back, not to our grandparents' generation, but thousands of generations back to the world of our hunter-gatherer ancestors. This was the environment that shaped us. It's the world our brains and bodies and nervous systems are designed for. For over 99% of human history, we lived in small, mobile bands of related and unrelated individuals. This world, this social and physical landscape, is the one that forged our core parenting instincts. And it looked nothing like our world today. The first and most important thing to understand is that no one raised a child alone. The idea of a mother and a father isolated in a single home, responsible for every single need of a child 24/7, would have been completely alien. It would have been seen as a form of madness, a recipe for failure. Children were raised by the group. They were raised by the village. This concept is sometimes called alloparenting. An alloparent is simply anyone who helps care for a child who isn't the biological parent. In a hunter-gatherer band, this was everyone. It was the grandmother who had a lifetime of experience. It was an aunt, a cousin, an older sibling. It was a close family friend. A baby would be passed from lap to lap, held and comforted by many different people throughout the day. Think about what this meant for the mother. It meant she wasn't the sole source of comfort, entertainment, and safety. She could hand the baby to her own mother to get a moment's rest. She could let her older child rock the baby while she prepared food. She had a built-in support system that shared the immense physical and emotional load of caring for a totally dependent infant. This wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity for survival. A mother who was exhausted, stressed, and isolated would have been a less effective mother. The group buffered her from that. It allowed her to be responsive and present without burning out. And for the child, this was incredible. The child learned from birth that the world was a safe place, full of people who would care for them. They formed a primary attachment to their mother, of course, but they also formed a web of other strong, loving bonds. They learned different ways of being held, different voices, different songs. This rich social environment gave them a deep sense of belonging and security. Their world wasn't just two sets of eyes, it was a dozen. If mom was busy or tired, another familiar, loving person was always right there. This contrasts so sharply with modern life. Today, a new mother often comes home from the hospital to an empty house. Her partner might have a few weeks of leave, if they're lucky, and then she's on her own. Her family might live hundreds of miles away. Her friends are busy with their own jobs and families. She is expected to be everything for her baby. Cook, cleaner, nurse, playmate, soother, teacher. It's a crushing weight, and it's a profoundly unnatural one. The high rates of postpartum depression and anxiety we see today are not a sign of individual failure. They are a predictable consequence of a social system that stripped away the village our biology expects. Connected to this idea of the village is the physical experience of the infant. For our ancestors, a baby was almost never alone. Not for a minute. For the first months and years of life, a baby's place was on a caregiver's body. They were carried in slings made of animal hide or woven fibers. They were held in arms. They slept right next to their mother's body at night. The modern concept of a separate nursery, a crib, a stroller, a playpen simply didn't exist. These are all inventions designed to create distance between the baby and the caregiver. For our ancestors, constant physical contact was the norm. It wasn't a parenting style or a choice. It was just how life worked. There were practical reasons for this. A baby on the ground was a baby vulnerable to predators, to the elements, to being stepped on. Keeping a baby on the body was the safest place for them to be. It also regulated their physiology. A baby held against its mother's chest has a more stable heart rate, more stable breathing, and a more stable body temperature. The mother's body acts as an external regulator for the baby's immature systems. This closeness also made breastfeeding incredibly simple and effective. There were no schedules. There were no clocks. The baby showed a hunger cue, a little root or a squirm, and the breast was immediately available. This is called nursing on demand. It wasn't just for food, it was for hydration. It was for comfort, it was for connection. A baby who was scared or hurt would nurse. A baby who was tired would nurse. The breast was a solution to almost everything. Because of this frequent, unrestricted nursing, our ancestors breastfed for much longer than we typically do today. The average age of weaning in these societies was often between 2 and 4 years old. Breast milk provided crucial antibodies and nutrition long after the introduction of solid foods. This extended period of nursing also had another important effect. It acted as a natural form of birth control. A woman who is nursing a child around the clock is less likely to ovulate, which created a natural spacing of about 3 to 4 years between children. This was vital. It ensured that each child got a long period of intense investment and care before a new sibling arrived. Again, compare this to our modern world. We put babies in cribs in their own rooms. We're told that holding them too much will spoil them. We put them in strollers and car seats, physically separated from us. We're encouraged to get them on a 4-hour feeding schedule. We often wean them after a year or even sooner to go back to work. Each of these practices creates a separation that an ancestral baby would never have experienced. Their brain is wired for constant contact, and when it doesn't get it, it registers that as a threat. This leads us to one of the most contentious modern parenting topics, crying. What did our ancestors do when a baby cried? The answer is simple. They picked it up immediately. There was no concept of crying it out or self-soothing. In the environment our ancestors lived in, a crying baby was an emergency. A loud, sustained cry was like a dinner bell for a predator. A saber-toothed cat or a hyena would hear that sound and know that a small, helpless meal was nearby. The instinct of the parent and the entire group would be to silence that cry as quickly as possible. This meant offering the breast, rocking, shushing, walking, whatever it took. The baby's cry is a signal. It says, something is wrong. I'm scared. I'm hungry. I'm cold. I'm alone. The evolved, correct response to that signal is to say, I'm here. You are safe. Your needs will be met. When a baby is left to cry alone, its body is flooded with stress hormones like cortisol. Its brain learns that the world is not a responsive place. It learns that its signals for help will not be answered. Eventually, it stops crying, not because it has learned to self-soothe, but because it has given up. It has entered a state of withdrawal to conserve energy. This is a survival mechanism, but it comes at a high psychological cost. Our ancestors understood this on a gut level. A baby's cry was not a form of manipulation to be ignored, but a desperate plea for survival to be answered. As these children grew out of infancy, their world expanded from the caregiver's body to the larger group. And this is where we see another major difference, the nature of play and learning. Ancestral children were the original free-range kids. They learned not through formal instruction, but through observation, imitation, and most importantly, free play. From the time they could walk, children spent most of their days in mixed-age playgroups, without any direct adult supervision or interference. The group might include a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a couple of 7-year-olds, and a 10-year-old. This structure is profoundly important and almost entirely absent from our modern, age-segregated world. In these groups, the older children were the teachers. They taught the younger children the rules of games, how to find edible berries, how to climb a tree safely. They modeled more complex social behavior. The younger children, in turn, offered the older ones a chance to be nurturing, to practice leadership, to be patient. It was a self-regulating, self-educating system. The play itself was the work of childhood. It wasn't frivolous. It was practice for adult life. Little boys would play hunt with small bows and arrows, learning to be quiet, to track, to aim. Little girls would play gather, learning to distinguish good plants from bad ones. They would build miniature shelters. They would practice making small tools. They would mimic the social dances and rituals of the adults. Through this play, they were building real-world skills. They were also learning to negotiate, to compromise, to resolve conflicts, to stand up for themselves. They were learning to manage risk. An adult wasn't there to say, be careful or don't climb that. They learned their own limits by testing them. Sometimes they fell. Sometimes they got scraped. And they learned. Modern childhood is often the opposite. Play is structured, directed by adults. It happens on safe playgrounds designed to eliminate all risk. Children are segregated into classrooms with 25 other kids who are all the exact same age. They have very little autonomy. Their days are scheduled from morning until night with lessons and organized sports. We've taken away the very thing that their brains are designed to do, learn about the world on their own terms, through self-directed play and exploration. We are trying to teach them things that our ancestors learned naturally, just by being allowed to be children in a rich and stimulating social environment. What about discipline? How did our ancestors ensure children behaved without timeouts, spankings, or reward charts? The primary form of discipline was integration into the social group. Hunter-gatherer societies are deeply egalitarian and cooperative. Survival depends on everyone getting along and pulling their weight. The worst possible fate was to be ostracized from the group. So, the goal of child rearing was not to break a child's will, but to teach them how to be a good cooperative member of the band. This was done mostly through modeling. Children saw how adults behaved, how they shared, how they resolved conflicts, and they imitated it. When a small child acted aggressively, say by hitting another child, the response wasn't punishment. It was typically gentle redirection. An adult might scoop them up and move them to a different activity, or simply say, "We don't hit people." There was a deep-seated trust in a child's innate desire to fit in and to be good. They believed that children are naturally social and want to please others. Storytelling was also a powerful tool. The group's values, its morals, its rules for living were all encoded in stories told around the fire at night. These stories taught children about generosity, about courage, about the dangers of selfishness or arrogance. They learned the right way to behave not through a list of rules, but through a rich cultural narrative they were a part of. Next, there was also a role for mild social pressure. If an older child was being particularly selfish, other members of the group might use gentle teasing or humor to signal their disapproval. Because the child's sense of self was so tied to their place in the group, this was usually enough to correct the behavior. The goal was always connection and correction, not punishment and shame. The idea of intentionally inflicting pain, physical or emotional, on a child to make them behave would have been seen as bizarre and counterproductive. You don't build a cooperative adult by treating a child with aggression. And what about fathers? The stereotypical image of the hunter-gatherer father is of a man who is often away, distant, and uninvolved in the day-to-day care of children. The reality seems to be much different. While mothers were undoubtedly the primary caregivers for infants, fathers were very much present and engaged. Fathers played with their children. They held them, they cuddled them. Anthropologists observing modern hunter-gatherer groups are often struck by how affectionate and gentle the fathers are. They provide a different kind of interaction, perhaps more physical and rough and tumble play, as the child gets older. They were also the primary protectors of the family in the group. Their presence created a circle of safety. Moreover, a boy didn't just have his own father as a male role model. He had his uncles, his grandfathers, the other adult men in the band. He would learn to hunt and make tools by watching and following all of them. A girl, likewise, had many female role models besides her mother. The responsibility for raising and teaching was distributed across the genders and across the entire community. A child's world was rich with relationships of all kinds, so when we put all these pieces together, a picture emerges. An ancestral child was born into a world of constant physical touch and affection. Their needs were met instantly, and without question. They were nursed for years. They were raised not by two stressed-out parents, but by a whole village of loving caregivers. They learned about the world through autonomous, mixed-age free play. They were disciplined with gentleness and guided by a desire for social harmony. They were trusted, they were deeply embedded in the natural world, and in a tight-knit social community. This is the environment our species adapted to. This is the kind of childhood our brains and bodies are programmed to expect. And this is why modern life and modern parenting can feel so hard. We are living in a profound evolutionary mismatch. Our babies cry when we put them down alone in a crib because their brains are screaming, "A predator is going to get me." We feel exhausted and touched out because we are trying to provide the constant physical contact of an entire village all by ourselves. Our toddlers have tantrums because their need for autonomy is clashing with a world of constant rules and containment. Our children are anxious and struggle with social skills because they have been deprived of the mixed-age free play that is supposed to teach them these very things. So, what are we to do with this knowledge? We can't abandon our lives and go live as hunter-gatherers. That world is gone. The point is not to romanticize the past or to feel guilty about our modern limitations. The point is to understand the deep evolved needs of our children and of ourselves as parents, and to see if we can find ways to meet those needs in our modern context. We can't recreate the hunter-gatherer band, but we can consciously build our own village. We can reach out to other parents, we can form co-ops, we can ask family and friends for more help, and be specific about what we need. We can prioritize community over isolation. We can't carry our babies 24/7, but we can choose to wear them in a sling when we can. We can choose to co-sleep safely or keep them in our room for longer. We can respond to their cries with empathy, understanding that they are not trying to manipulate us but are expressing a valid ancient need for closeness and security. We can't let our children run wild in the forest, but we can fight for more unstructured playtime. We can step back and let them take small, manageable risks. We can seek out opportunities for them to play with children of different ages. We can trust their ability to learn through play rather than filling their every moment with adult-led activities. We can look at discipline not as something we do to a child, but as an opportunity to connect and teach. We can model the behavior we want to see. We can use gentle guidance instead of punishment. We can trust their innate desire to cooperate. Understanding how our ancestors raised their children isn't about adopting a rigid set of prehistoric rules. It's about a shift in perspective. It's about seeing our children's behavior not as a problem to be managed, but as a reflection of ancient needs. It's about recognizing that our own struggles as parents often stem from the profoundly unnatural conditions we are living under. It gives us permission to be kinder to ourselves and to our children. It reminds us that at our core, we are social primates who are wired for connection, for community, and for a slow, gentle, and playful childhood. The blueprint is already there. We just have to learn how to read it again.